So we're picking up from the end of the last chapter. We're seeing Yookane finally getting to meet his sister Yuka, and you can notice that when he's walking to the house, he has this string-like connection on the back of his head. So I think this version of Yookane that we're seeing here is really just his righteous net reaching out over the entire city. It's not like Yookane is physically there. And this could help explain why when he sees his sister, she looks a lot younger. It's probably because he's only able to hear her and doesn't yet know what she looks like now in the present time. And when she starts talking, she mentions how Yato gave her a warning a couple days back. This is actually in reference to chapter 88, when Yato first arrives to her house, and he did this to protect her from father. This is why she isn't at the house the first time father and Yookane go to see her. So thankfully it worked out. She ended up staying at a hotel and was able to avoid them, but then it turns out that Yuka is actually talking to Hiyori here. And of course, because Yookane doesn't see them, it's only until Yuka says her name that Yookane realizes that Hiyori's in the same room as her. But then his sister starts talking about the letters. We're finally seeing the truth revealed here to Yookane about why there wasn't any communication from her back when he was alive. And this is interesting because when she shows Hiyori the letters, they're specifically hers and the ones that were sent back to her. In other words, their dad didn't even send her the ripped pieces of the letters that Yookane wrote. He was that petty enough to make sure they had zero communication whatsoever. But because Nora had gave her one of Yukane's letters that she found in the fridge, she draws a very important connection here about the postmarks. And now Yookane and Hiyori are both on the same page here. They're trying to tell Yuka that it's not true, that Yookane was writing to her consistently. But then this is where we get to honestly one of the most heartbreaking moments here, when she comes out with this theory about their mother. And I have to admit, I just really wish their mom got just as much hate as their dad, right? Because if Yuka's theory is true about their mom essentially helping their dad to make sure there was zero communication between them, then she's just as guilty in my opinion. And overall, I've always had the feeling that their mom was just as terrible, because if you go back to when Yuka makes them sign for the divorce, she very selfishly agrees with the idea, but I just always suspected that she only agreed to this to save her own skin. Because I don't think she's stupid either. I think she realizes how abusive her husband was to her own kids, but she was just passively letting it all happen in front of her so that none of that abuse would be directed at her. Because again, she doesn't fight the fact that her own daughter is straight up showing them both the paperwork for a divorce. There was always just so much wrong with that. And this is going back to chapter 91, when their dad sees that she's already signed the paperwork, and you can visually see him start to get aggressive here. And the mom starts to sweat nervously here and just laughs at this. But what's worse is that it even looks like she was about to change her mind, because she says to him, "Yuka told me to sign, but on second thought." And before she could finish her sentence and even change her mind about the divorce, their dad offers the deal to take one of the kids with him. And everything about this was so messed up, because if she really cared for her kids, she would have took them both with her, even if it meant she had to make the slightest sacrifice. And I know Yuka calls her mom subservient to their dad, but no, I think she was just straight up selfish and was only caring about herself. I mean, you can literally see it later in the chapter when Yukane's life starts to flash before his eyes. We see Yuka in one shot with tears trying to talk to Yookane, but the mom's face expression is so cold here. She just says, "Sorry Haru, we'll write, we need to go." And it's even worse because she's straight up lying here, because as far as Yookane had known, they had never wrote to him. But despite all of this, we're seeing Yuka still put the burden on herself. She says, "Instead of relying on letters, I should have just swallowed my fears and called him. I should have gone to see him. Even if he resented me, I should have looked harder. I just thought if I stayed here, someday he would come to see me." So this is where we're seeing how terribly conditioned she was at this age by her parents, right? Because we can't forget, she was actually suicidal at one point. The fear and abuse she went through was just that extreme, to the point she was afraid to even call him. But in spite of how guilty she feels, I just can't bring myself to blame her for anything. This entire situation was just so undeserving and tragic for the both of them. And Yukane's trying to talk to her. He's shouting at her saying he's right there, that he came to see her. But then we get to the biggest point in the chapter when she says it right in front of Yookane, "Haruki is dead, isn't he?" And this is so ironic, especially from Yuka's point of view, because even if Yookane is hearing her in the same room as her, it doesn't change the fact her brother Haruki had died. And after getting it officially exposed here, we're seeing his kanji name start to crack even more. His whole human life starts to flash before his eyes. And then we're cutting back to the actual time of his death, and we can't forget one of the bigger reasons why his dad locked him in this fridge to begin with was to hide him after he nearly beat him to death. Because at this point, Yookane is still alive, but as he's throwing these pieces of ripped letters on his body, he tells Yookane, "You dying ain't my fault, it's divine punishment, it's what you get for disobeying your parents." And this line line about divine punishment cuts so deep because we're literally seeing the danger of what it's like when someone like Yukane's dad tries to play God. And this is why I've always appreciated how Yato explained that whatever a god does is the right choice, because the gods are already preconditioned to learn and know the ideas of good and evil because of their regalia. So in other words, their divine judgment is premeditated on how they're blighted by their own regalia, for example, or the fact they inherit all the memories of their regalia's previous human lives. But when it comes to someone like Yukane's dad or Yato's father, who can just make up their own moral compass and scale of judgment, this is when it becomes dangerous, because they're ultimately just inflating their own egos and turning themselves into gods. So it's interesting he says divine judgment here, because it's not like the gods killed Yookane. It just so happened to be his evil and mentally deranged dad trying to act like a god. And at this point we're seeing Yookane dying in the fridge, but when we see him again, he's now in his spirit form as a Sudama. And the last thing he remembered was a letter he meant to mail out to his sister. I'm pretty sure it's the same one that Nora ended up giving her. And this explains why Yato first found Yookane by a mailbox. His Sudama made the trip down to the mailbox to eventually mail that letter out to her. And as Yookane reaches down to his pocket, he pulls out the charm that Yato and Hiyori gifted him for his birthday. But in the distance, he hears someone calling for his Yookane name, and it's actually Yato who's still trying to call out to him. And I love this scene so much because he isn't calling Yookane by his Seki name, he's calling out to him as Yookane, the human name he was gifted with by Yato. And finally, we're seeing Yookane unravel from his vessel form as Hagusa, but he's also finally leaving father for now. And it's not like he doesn't have the Hagusa name still, but at least he's willingly coming back to Yato on his own here. And he's falling down from the sky here. Yato's able to catch him, and I have to be honest, as heartbreaking as this chapter was, I think this scene here hit the most for me, right? And I'm talking about when Yato is holding Yookane, because I just can't imagine how Yato must be feeling. Because even though Yookane is his regalia, their father and son relationship runs so deep that I can't imagine how Yato must be feeling to finally have him back. And this is because Yato knew there was a good and honest chance that he might never have gotten him back. There was no guarantee he was gonna be able to be with him again, so this is probably the moment that pulled at me the most for sure. And even though it looked like Yookane was able to respond to Yato calling for his name, it looks like he's finally found out the cause of his death. He now knows the god's secret. And this is interesting because it's not like his entire kanji name cracked. The crack only got deeper, so I'm not sure what it is that's holding Yookane together here. But regardless, I'm also not sure how Yato's supposed to react here. Maybe Yookane is strong enough to endure it like Nana or Mizuchi, but like I said, it's not like his entire kanji name cracked, so there has to be a lot more going on here. But that's going to be the end of the video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. And for those of you who are new to my channel, I say this every month, but like always, I'm going to be covering the Noragami manga here every month on a regular basis. So if this is something you want to see, then make sure you subscribe, and please let me know in the comments how you're all feeling about this month's chapter, what you agreed or disagreed with, and leave a like if you enjoyed the video. I'd greatly appreciate it. And yeah, again, thank you so much for watching, guys. Have a great day.